Hey everyone, it's Sara Sophia Eisenman. This is part 2 of a 4-part series called How to Stay Sane and Grounded in the Era of the Rabbit Hole, and in particular with regards to the current situation that we are in with coronavirus, lockdown, and all of the craziness. Part 1, I explained that I am a trauma survivor myself, that with regards to conspiracy theories and what I'm generally calling the rabbit hole, which is basically these alternate narratives of government, truth, policy, the world that are being put forth right now through movements such as Q, that I believe that there are deep levels of truth. There's deep aspects of important things being said there with regards to elite pedophilia, child abuse, human rights abuses, potential dangers with regards to things like vaccines, and that I think that there's a lot of real stuff to consider within these, and that we should all be vigilant going through this with regards to our rights. And I also mentioned that I have some red flags around these movements and the way that they seem to be generating a type of hysteria, a sense of like ungroundedness for people, and a lot of other red flags that I'm going to get into right now. And I feel like they're, in a way, many of these YouTube videos and alternate theories of reality are in a way exploiting and manipulating the situation to get people hooked into these narratives and derail us from sovereignty and derail us from presence in the moment. And whenever that happens, it's a huge red flag for me personally, because my whole belief system is built upon being present now and doing our own work and taking personal agency and responsibility. So whenever anything feels to be antithetical to those goals, immediately I feel both a desire and a responsibility to investigate that and then to speak my truth with regards to it. That's exactly what I'm doing here today. So it's not to discount from anybody who is exploring the rabbit hole of these theories and feeling compelled by that. It's not to say that there isn't grains of truth there. It's more to offer a perspective of how we can be with all of these narratives in a way that feels safe and sane to us as individuals going through a rather extreme rite of passage together. So, okay, red flags that I have seen within the Q movement and other similar movements that I feel like are worthy of addressing. I have a list of them. So, number 1 is that these movements tend to generate both obsession and paranoia. Obsession means we're not able to look away from it fully in order to go back to full presence in the moment, in the now. We have to watch that next YouTube video. We got to go down that next turn of the rabbit hole to see what's there. We have to try to assemble all the pieces of this puzzle. We have to talk in the chat window endlessly about how these different theories fit together to try to figure out what's going on and what's going to be done to us and predict the future and listen to all these theories. And in the case of Q, there's these children that are supposed to be coming out of tunnels and these complex narratives about how children are being rescued and from child abuse and sex trafficking. And so people are obsessed. They're hooked into this drama, waiting for the next Q drop, waiting for the next morsel and tidbit of information. Like I said, trying to assemble this puzzle endlessly. And the danger of that is, as I said, obsession, that at the end of the day, it becomes hard to turn off and turn away from. It has an addictive quality that can be almost drug-like. So that's obsession. The paranoia aspect I will get into more, but in brief, there's a sense of these manipulative overlords and this dark agenda that has a really bad feeling to it, almost like a horror movie. And within that, we are the pawns, we are the slaves, and or there's these children who are, enslaved en masse. And It has a phantasmagorical quality to it that generates like, oh my God, I have to like look around me because who's surveilling me and what's going on, you know, right now, like that they're trying to force us into the next version of slavery, or, you know, find out a way to harvest more adrenochrome from children, or ... right? So it has this quality of paranoia that it doesn't necessarily ground us into empowerment and the present moment and what we can do as individuals to be whole and healed. It has to do with boogeymen out there and what the boogeymen are up to. So that's another one. Okay. Along with that, there's a fascination with gore and horror. And it reminds me a lot of people who go to see horror movies repeatedly. Horror movies have that, for some people, addictive quality, and that's sort of like you can't look away from it. So there's these videos of like that are supposed to be Hillary Clinton, you know, ripping the face off some child. There's untold, almost like snuff films that are going around the internet that are purportedly showing different aspects of this elite abuse. And there is a dark and disgusting culture associated with, as I mentioned in the last video, Marina Abramovich and the spirit cooking and these like images of satanic abuse and creepy stuff of men wearing red shoes and just all this creepy symbolism and imagery. But the problem that I have with the movement around this is that there is an obsession with watching these things that is almost as bad as the people who are originally creating them, in my opinion. It's like we're supposed to be watching this snuff stuff and we're supposed to, like, you know, we're not woke or in the know unless we're tuned into this gore and this horror. For me personally, it's important to know that there is, you know, egregious abuse in the world, and it is not healthy for me as an individual to be viewing that on a regular basis, pretty much any basis at all. Like, I can't look at that kind of thing. I don't choose to. I know that disgusting things happen in the world all the time. You just look at Pornhub if you want to know that, you know. Abuse is rampant, but that doesn't mean I want to lend my consciousness to it. And for me, there is an obsession with the gore element that feels addictive and adrenaline based in a way that is like not particularly sovereign. And I'm not saying to put your head in the sand, but for me, it's not, I don't bond with people over watching like horror videos. It's not a healthy or happy place for my psyche to live. I feel that the way that this is hooking into people to create obsession, paranoia, and obsession with gore and horror, fixation on those things, is that it's tapping into people's unhealed and unresolved trauma. So a lot of us carry wounding, sexual trauma from our childhood, a sense of emptiness based in abandonment, many types of childhood wounds that we carry. And when we think about poor children being trapped in a tunnel or having their organs harvested or some of these horrible, you know, narratives, it takes us to the place of like feeling extreme identification with this narrative. And that's very understandable because a lot of us have lived similar scenarios in real life. The problem I have with that on the whole is that it takes us out of our own healing process and hooks us into this collective narrative of truth, which is quasi-truth. I'm going to get to that in a minute. And it often is a distraction away from the core work that we need to be doing in the here and now to be whole. And we think that we're helping by lending our consciousness to this movement about, you know, how these children being rescued, et cetera, or being woke about, you know, these elite plans and schemes. Yet what's really going on is that we're bypassing our own need to be conscious and our own really core healing work, which is often very individual. And as much as it's lovely to want to support the healing of children everywhere in the world, it's not going to be a substitute ever for facing the hard nitty-gritty work that is so not glamorous or associated with any like cool messianic figures like Q, of just being in your own, process and healing that wounding and trauma. So I feel like what's happening is that people are getting hooked into this, and it's a way to get people away from themselves, distracted. That goes into my next point, is that would be one thing if everything that we're being offered in this movement were true and valid and without agenda. But there is a lot of agenda, I feel, laced in to these narratives. And for me, there's a far-right agenda. There is an anti-Semitic tinge. There's often a racist tinge. There's also an evangelical, for me, a repetition of a lot of evangelical culture that I experienced in my youth, I see in the Q movement. And it's this us versus them narrative. It's this messianic, this faux messianism of, Q/Trump as Messiah. And the rest of us as kind of like passive onlookers, because we're not actually, we have no agency within that narrative. There's these white hats, then there's these elites who are all shadowy and awful. And then we're supposed to just wait for the next Q drop, right? And get hooked into that and need to go down that rabbit hole over and over and over and over again in a repetitive and addictive manner. Again, there's no actual agency or healing for the individual in that. It is a derailing of the individual's agency. I personally don't subscribe to the idea that Q or Trump or really anyone is this savior type. I don't subscribe to that notion of messianism, and I see a lot of that out there in a way that scares me. The reason that this scares me is that I've seen it justify a lot of hatred, a lot of othering of people. So first of all, if you don't subscribe to this, you're not woke. So there's already a label put on you. You're less intelligent and less in the know than someone who has gone down this rabbit hole and has joined this club, which actually has a cult-like feeling to me. So now someone else isn't as smart as you. That's number one. You've got this smug superiority thing happening. That's not a healthy position to be in with regards to the rest of humanity as I perceive it. Another thing is it tends to go very deeply speculative and putting speculation out as though it's fact. So, examples. Shakira is a Satanist because she did that kind of ululating thing with her tongue at the Super Bowl. That was the narrative that all the Q people had. This is a satanic Illuminati symbol or gesture that she's doing. In actuality, that was a representation of her Lebanese culture, and that was a very ancient, I think it was like a goat herding sound that then got interpolated into belly dancing. And women have been doing that culturally for a very, very long time in her Lebanese culture, so she's honoring her roots. But instead of people understanding that as she's honoring her roots, she was immediately called a Satanist. I saw this repeatedly and had to unfriend a ton of people because they were like, she's Illuminati, she's a Satanist. She's a Satanist because she's doing this thing with her tongue that you don't understand. And this is a problem because it results in racism, for one thing, and the ability to justify vilifying someone else in a very dark, ugly, cruel manner on the basis simply of you're ignorant of their culture. And for me, the Q thing has a lot of ignorance built into it with regards to cultural difference, and tends to call everything satanic and Illuminati that it doesn't understand. As a Jewish woman, I've experienced this a lot. I've seen horrible anti-Semitism and justification of Nazi propaganda, use of Nazi propaganda, whole conversations about how Jews are reptiles, etc., under the heading of we're woke. So we understand more about Jews than the Jews do. And this is disgusting to me. Absolutely disgusting. It reminds me of the rise of Hitler. It's awful. There's so many ways in which I've seen hatred and cruelty justified on the basis of these conspiracy theory narratives. And that's probably the number one most pressing issue that I see with it, is that it's making people hateful, or it can if we're not careful about how we're routing our energy. So justifying this us versus themism, thinking that you know somebody else's Illuminati just because you saw an internet meme about it or watched a YouTube video about it, these are not grounded beliefs. And I think we need to take responsibility for that and not let ourselves go there. I've had to unfriend a ton of people and do a lot of speaking up on the basis of this. So another aspect of that, probably relatedly, is that, at least in the Q stuff, there's always a sense that, like, just you wait until X happens, and X is something down the road that never really happens. So just you wait till those sealed indictments get unsealed. They've been saying that forever. We're still waiting for that. I haven't seen evidence of that. Just you wait till these children come out of the tunnels. Are we ever going to see these things happen? Just you wait until JFK Jr. shows up and he turns out to be Q. There's so many layers of, like, carrot on a stickness that people think that they know something about, but in the end run, it does not manifest. If you notice, it's always a deferment and a distraction. It's always some future thing that's going to happen outside of oneself, and you're supposed to be the passive onlooker who just waits for it to occur. And I don't see these things happening. I don't see this as being grounded. I see this as being an adrenaline fix. Just you wait until you get your next adrenaline fix. Oh, but look, now there's another one. Don't look there, look over here. Bait and switch time. And I honestly feel like the Q stuff has a lot of, like, far-right psyop in it. I feel like it taps into, I don't know if Trump is promoting the Q thing or if he's consciously stoking that flame, but I don't think he's doing much to dispel the hatred around it or doing much to help ground what's happening at the moment with that. Another reason that I'm concerned about that is that over the long haul, this destabilizes people to the point where they're addicted and they are not being present to their life. So there's people who have children, and instead of being with their children, they're scrolling and reading and YouTubing and getting in a froth and a frenzy about this stuff that is so ungrounded and so without factual basis that we know of. But they're neglecting their self-care, their children, their livelihood, their safety in some cases, and trauma bonding in this with other people who are also down the rabbit hole. That might feel really good because you're like, hey, I'm part of this big community and, like, we're all so woke together. And, I would be totally fine with that, except that it's a form of trauma bonding if it takes you away from the here and now. And if you're not doing the work that is being asked of you to heal those hooks I told you about, at the beginning, that if you have your own sexual abuse history, if you have your own woundedness that causes you to be highly vulnerable to these things, there's a very good chance that what you're experiencing in this form of camaraderie of bonding with other people who are down the rabbit hole with you is not stable. It's a form of a trauma bond. It's a repetition of your unhealed trauma. So these things concern me, and I don't see a lot of attention given. I don't see a lot of responsibility on the part of most people who are claiming to be in the Q community. I see a lot of smug people insulting others, saying that other people just don't get it if they don't agree, and citing speculation as fact, claiming that their narrative is the truth and not a possible lens on truth, and being very dogmatic, almost religiously dogmatic and cult-like in their demand that other people subscribe to this, or that this is the ultimate version of truth and the rest of us are just too stupid to see it. And I don't find that to be loving. I don't see how any real movement toward awakening, in quotes, whatever you want to call that, can be grounded in that much hatred and racial division, ignorance, and lack of responsibility. Again, I've already said that I think that there are lots of elements of truth in some of the things that are being said. I think that there's a huge lack of evidence for most of the claims that are being made. I think some of them are dangerously unstable. I think for anyone to take them as fact is highly questionable. I think, there could be merit in parsing this very carefully, and this is what I'm going to get to in the next video. There can be ways to navigate this type of learning, if you wish to, in a safer way. And I want to go to that next because it's all important for those of us who do have trauma. What is ending up happening is that there's actually been a lot of deaths associated with this movement now, because there's a lot of mentally unstable people out there who are taking this to be the end-all be-all truth, and it's inciting things like anti-Semitism at a level we haven't seen, hate crimes, people having psychotic breaks around this Q stuff and committing crimes, sometimes murders. It can be very, very dark. I think that there is also entity attachment associated with a lot of this. When people go down the rabbit hole and they're now not present to reality, the here and now, unfortunately, they've got a vacancy sign on their soul, on their being, and entities are attracted to that. So when someone is not inhabiting their vessel and someone is being disembodied, it's like an invitation for entity interference. And I see a lot of that happening in these types of movements as well, which is one huge reason that, especially in this era, when we're all still trying so hard to stay healthy and, there's a lot of fear running roughshod, I have really turned off the conspiracy noise in my life. And I've been sticking to what I know. What I know might be simple. It might be less dramatic and thrilling. Maybe I'm not into this huge narrative truth, that everybody else might think they're tapped into. But what I know is here and now and real. And it's focused on my breath, my family, very, very grounded in simple things. I'll get more into that in the next video. But I just want to kind of put out those red flags around this. One last point is that in this current era of, where people are dying of this coronavirus, and I happen to know some who have been very ill. I know others who many others who have lost loved ones, and many, quite a few who were afraid for their life and then ended up pulling through. I don't know anybody who has actually died of this yet, which is, kind of miracle. As I talk to a lot of people, but I do know that there's a great deal of suffering going on, and this is quite real. I've seen a whole lot of people on the internet calling this entire thing a hoax and saying, like, anybody who claims this is real or thinks this is real is asking to have a police state and wants their human rights taken from them. And I don't know how that must feel to someone who is sitting, on a ventilator somewhere, clinging to life and their last breath, to know that there's so many people on the internet who would rather cling to their ideology of this entire thing being a hoax than have compassion for someone who is literally dying in a hospital bed. And I feel very, very upset about that. I know a lot of other people do too. So please, if you are in this rabbit hole, if you're in this investigation of what you feel is a greater and deeper truth, please consider humanity as the ground. Like, if we don't have our humanity and our compassion for other people who are going through very real things, then it doesn't matter how much truth we think we know. We've lost the ball. We've lost the through line for sure. Like, you could know every fact about, every conspiracy that ever went on and every evil plot the elite ever wanted to enact. But if you're not grounded in love, you still don't know anything. Me neither. And I think that's the core point of all of this that I want to encourage people to feel into. If it feels dark to your body, and it feels destabilizing, and it feels ungrounding, and it feels hijacking, there's something to that. So I'm going to go more into that in the next part. I've already gone over this one in terms of time, but I'm pretty passionate about this, so thank you for listening. I understand the desire to want to explore these truths in terms of the systemic, some of the systemic abuses that have gone on, and to get to the bottom of that. There may be no bottom that we can reach Sometimes there's, we have to kind of draw a line where we go, you know what, I know enough about that. I know enough about how dark it can be and how disgusting it can be. And I'm doing enough right here and now by being with myself to heal that situation. So beware, because there can be a line there. And we'll say more about that in the next one.